Welcome to the 3DownNation podcast. I'm Justin Dunk, joined by John Hodge and J.C. Abbott. Let me repeat, boys. Mr. Abbott is an absolute plow horse. I know I'm going back in the day for some people, but this guy was a machine. If we can pull back the curtain a little bit, JC, you on the live blog was actually pretty funny. I laughed at a bunch of the one-liners in there. You ran that thing for the majority. Hodge got it started, but you're elite at that, dude. Great job.
I appreciate it. I tried to be pithy. I don't know. It's hard because it's not like a stand-up comedy act. I can't tell if my audience is laughing, but it made me laugh. So I assumed that it was all right.
I did like the gag about the start of free agency being as boring as the Super Bowl. That made me laugh. I didn't dislike the Super Bowl. I thought it was fine. But yeah, not the most exciting game I think any of us have ever seen. So yeah, I liked it. And obviously, I think kudos to all you folks. Obviously, Justin breaking a ton of stories, JC killing it with the live blog. And then obviously, all of our readers, listeners, viewers, supporters did an amazing job of coming to us for all the news, insight analysis, which was fantastic. So CFL free agency, I think a big old love fest. At least for me, I thought it was great.
My guy Hodge is no slouch, though, man. I got to say it on the air, how far you've come. I was thinking about it after the frenzy died down, Hodge. You used to be Blue Bomber Talk, a fan blogger. Now you're out here taking the lead, breaking news. I know that's not necessarily new, but I feel like you've gone to another level, man. So kudos to you from where you started to where you are now, and then where we continue to evolve and push each other to in the future. The sky is the limit, as the football cliche goes.
12 years. It's been a long time, which is like a third of my life, which is crazy to say. But yeah, we keep getting better every year, which is the goal. And I hope, regardless of whether it's 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, whatever in the future, we're still doing the same thing, just trying to get better every single year. Because obviously, I think we already do good work, but I think we can do amazing work. We just have to keep getting better each and every time.
JC Youngbuck, how long have you been around now since we discovered you as the ratio breaker?
I was halfway through the 2019 season, so I guess, what's that, 7.5 years at this stage? Or 6.5?
6.5.
Like that.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Time flies. I remember
really
seeing this account breaking CFL draft news. I'm going like, Hodge and I pretty much owned everything at that point in terms of the CFL draft news and people being added to the list, and this random account with no face on it popping out news. Like, who is this guy? All of a sudden we uncover it's the cheese. It's the man with the porn stash. It's JC Abbott.
I respect that you're calling it a porn stash. Other people call it much more derogatory terms, but...
Well, we got two people on the pod with me here. We got the stash and we got the KOD.
Enough of that business, boys. But in all honesty,
gotta love
you guys killed it. I appreciate how you guys are getting after it, and our contributors as well are going to have their say on their respective teams and gains and losses in free agency and how they're looking heading into the 2026 CFL season. And you can't forget, bears repeating because some people don't want to hear it. I don't know why. The CFL Combine is coming up. Mm-hmm. You two will have unparalleled coverage, and I'll definitely be there in a support role. You guys have really taken the lead on that in recent years. And then obviously into the CFL draft, which, I mentioned this on a call where some CFL prospects were on and they asked me to come and talk. And I just thought about it actually on a whim. Last year, there were two legit picks, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong because there might have been more, that were instant impact makers in the CFL. That's where we're at with the level of talent coming out of the CFL draft. I'm talking about Damian Alford, who signed a contract with the New Orleans Saints, and then Devin Verasuk, who signed a contract with the Indianapolis Colts, after their respective rookie seasons. And there are other examples, as I'm sure you guys could detail here in a second. But people need to pay attention to the draft process, the combines, the pro days, and the CFL draft, because it can make a real impact, and sooner rather than later, at least in recent years.
Yeah,
Oh,
Christopher Fortin, another guy who was a day one starter at center, one of the best in the league last season. Jackson Findlay, what he did late in the year for BC at safety was elite. I think he's a guy who can be one of the best at his position. The list goes on. These guys are coming into the league year one and absolutely blowing it up, season starting jobs, playing at an all-star level. The days of guys needing 3 years to develop before you were seeing their true potential, I think are long gone. We're getting guys who are ready day one.
oh, I think you guys are selling it short. We had 8th-round picks playing. King Ambers started games as an 8th-round pick for the Red Blacks. And another 8th-round pick, Lucas Stoikos, is out here competing for an Olympic medal in the bobsleigh. Like, some of these guys going round 8 are out doing cool stuff, whether it's in the CFL as impact players or whether it's representing our country in Italy. Like, this is the kind of stuff you get with the draft. But as excited I am for the draft, boys, we gotta put a pin on this free agency period and give us final chapter here before we move on to anything else.
All right, let's do it. Today we're breaking down eye-popping price tags for CFL free agents.
An unprecedented move by the 3-down league.
Super Bowl ratings dropping.
A new CFL award with a deserving namesake.
Canadians being invited to the NFL Combine.
And old hard feelings between Darian Durant and Andy Fantus. But first,
The Hamilton Tiger Cats were the most active team after the market officially opened, signing two-time All-East Division receiver Curly Gittens Jr., as first reported by 3DownNation.com, along with American pass catcher Carrick Wheatfall, offensive lineman Trevor Reed, and Eric Lofton, returner Mario Alford, Canadian defensive lineman Charbel DeBuyer, and global punter Fraser Massin, with Canadian quarterback Trey Ford, star linebacker Winton McManus, along with Tyson Middlemost, Chris Kolinkowski, and Kenny Onyeka in Steeltown. Did the Ticats win 2026 free agency?
No, they didn't win it, but I do like what they did, right? When you looked at the reported departures, and there were a lot of them, they lost the field side of that secondary with Jonathan Moxey and Deshaun Amos, both guys who have been all-stars in this league. Taylor Powell as a potential, franchise quarterback of the future. He's gone. And then 3 good offensive linemen, including, I think Coulter Woodmansey's one of the best interior guys in the league. With him, Brendan Bordner, and Jordan Murray all leaving for Edmonton, you kind of started to go like, oh my gosh, like who's filling this roster in Hamilton? And, they agreed with Eric Lofton pretty quickly. And I think Eric Lofton is a solid player, but he's not up to the level of some of the guys they lost. And so I think Trevor Reed, coming up back from the NFL, where he spent the 2025 season after starting as a raw rookie and doing very well at left tackle for the Saskatchewan Roughriders in 2024, that's maybe the sneaky best signing of all the free agency is, okay, they kept Quentin Barrow on the right side of that O-line in Hamilton. They've now got Trevor Reed there as the left tackle. They've got their depth guy in Eric Lofton. Yeah, Coulter Woodmansey's a big loss, but Kolinkowski is a nice add. You lose Devin Verasuk at middle linebacker to the NFL. Boom, you put in Winton McManus, who's arguably a better player. He's one of the best defensive players in the entire CFL. And then obviously Trey Ford stepping in for Taylor Powell. And look, Tim White, I think, is a significant loss. He's obviously in Winnipeg after getting cut early. But I think Carrick Wheatfall has some untapped potential. He's a guy who I think the Bombers liked, just they couldn't afford to wait around and see if he'd take that next step. This is a Bombers team that needs to get back into the Grey Cup, I think. They still see themselves as being in that window. So it's possible here that Winnipeg's loss is Hamilton's gain, picking up a guy with more of an upside than Tim White, but maybe not as good of a player, at least right now. And this is also a team that I think quietly lost Nick Constantino, their punter, to the NFL. So I think Fraser Massin coming in is a perfect fit. So, everywhere where this team had holes, let's say, a week or two ago that we were kind of concerned about, they've patched them. And Curly Gittens Jr., yeah, coming off a bit of a down year, but he still put up 800 yards in what was a very mediocre at best
Mhm.
passing offense at Edmonton. Like, who's to say he can't be 1,000-yard guy with Hamilton, a team that has Kenny Lawler, who I believe is the best receiver in the CFL, and another 1,000-yard Canadian guy in Keandre Smith. So I think that any concerns that fans in Steeltown had last week, and I certainly had some of those concerns as a member of the media, are gone now. I think Hamilton was a first place team in 2025. And yeah, they lost some good pieces, don't get me wrong, but they could very well still be a first place team in 2026.
You laid that out really well, Hodge. Now, I do think you're overselling it a little bit. They haven't patched every single hole. There's still a question mark as to who's going to replace Greg Bell at running back. That's unknown at this stage. I think there's still some concern in terms of how they're going to arrange that defensive line, where they're going to find those Canadian starters. You know, who's replacing Deshaun Amos and Jonathan Moxey. Those are positions that you can find young Americans to step in early in their careers. So I'm not overly concerned about it, but there are still question marks and holes on this Ticats roster that they didn't necessarily have a year ago. With that said, they did answer a lot of the questions that we raised in our podcast last week. And to me, they made some of the best additions in all of free agency. We already talked about Wynton McManus and Trey Ford last week. Obviously, I love those signings, but Curly Gittens Jr., I think, was a tremendous value add. His market to me in free agency should have been much higher because I don't think he was utilized properly in Edmonton or didn't have necessarily the tools around him to have the most success. We've seen at his peak, he's a 1,000-yard receiver. Potentially, he can get back to that in this Ticats offense. And then Trevor Reed might be the sneakiest best signing of free agency. Obviously, there are bigger name players. There are more dollars being thrown around. Those guys are going to make an impact. Don't get me wrong. But this is the one that came out of left field. I think addresses a direct need for the Ticats and has the most potential because I really liked what we saw from Reed in that one rookie season with the Saskatchewan Roughriders. Now, he got hurt last year. That derailed his NFL shot with the Minnesota Vikings. He's essentially not played all year. So how will that affect him? We don't know, but I love the upside of that addition. And I think it was a really savvy one by the Ticats front office.
Trevor Reed is ultra athletic, man. And if he can get back to his form that he showed in Saskatchewan, that could be a great ad for the Ticats at what I'm assuming is where he'll play left tackle. He's like 6'8", 300 plus pounds. And if you find the videos on social media, he can do backflips. Like, it's insane how athletic this guy is. And there wasn't really much chatter about him among people that I talked to in the league. There was almost this sort of quietness around him. And the Ticats clearly took advantage of that and had an idea and a plan in place when they lost some of those tackles to the Edmonton Elks, Jordan Murray and Brendan Bordner, to name a couple, and thought, okay, if we can slide Trevor Reed in there, we're actually potentially getting better. And I can see it. Reed is ultra athletic, man. Definitely a great ad by the Ticats. I look at the running back position, as you pointed to, JC, and you've talked about this in the past, that you think it's a place where you can find guys, especially as Americans. So the Ticats are going to have to do that. My concerns still focus on the defensive side of the football, having that other consistent pass rush from somebody else other than Julian Hauser, and then also the secondary, as you two both touched on. And for as good as Wynton McManus is, I think you could argue it's an upgrade over Devin Verasuk. He's not Canadian. And I don't think that was a major area of weakness with the way that Verasuk had played in his rookie season. So it's great to get McManus. I'm not throwing shade or anything like that. It's an awesome get you take from a division rival. He's arguably among the best defensive players in the league, especially when he's healthy for a full season. But I think that was a major spot that they had to fill. And that leads me into Curly Gittens Jr. I think he was critical to get for Hamilton from the ratio perspective, because that was one of, if not our top concern about the Ticats through the communication window, was how are they going to start and deploy their 7, potentially even more Canadians on the roster? Well, Curly Gittens Jr. is a bona fide, legitimate starter as a receiver, a ratio breaker at that position, has been an East All-Star twice, has been a CFL All-Star in the past, had an 1,100-yard season, won a Grey Cup with the Toronto Argonauts as essentially their number one receiver that season with McLeod Bethel-Thompson throwing him the football. So I look at that receiving group and I'm like, man, it is ultra talented. I don't want to go so far as to say that it's the best group in the Canadian Football League, because I definitely think the Ottawa Red Blacks would want a word, but it is very, very deep. And I do think, I'll agree with Hodge, that Kenny Lawler is the best receiver in the Canadian Football League. So usually if you got the best guy, that tips the scales in your favor, but it has to be proven out on the field.
I'd probably put Ottawa and Winnipeg right up there for best free agency if we want to crown a winner. But I do think that the Edmonton Elks deserve consideration. And the reason for that is I think they might have the best difference between what they added and what they lost. And what I mean by that is, like, this is a team that added multiple starting caliber offensive tackles. They added one of the top interior linemen in the league in Coulter Woodmansee. They added arguably the best pass rusher in the league and Malik Carney. They added arguably, number one receiver in Austin Mack, like a solid number 3 receiver in Joe Robustelli. And their only losses, fellas, devondrick Bynum, who was hurt basically all last year, Michael Broderick, who was not very productive in 3 seasons there, Tanner Green, who retired, fullback, Jonathan Kongbo, who is like a rotational guy, and then Jake Seresna. Jake Seresna is a fantastic defensive player, but this is also a team that's getting Noah Curtis back from a torn ACL. So those two guys, I'm not saying Curtis is right up there with Seresna, but he's been fantastic at times, and he's Canadian. So I think that maybe more so than any other team has the biggest disparity between what they added versus what they lost. But Hamilton, I think, deserves credit right up there. I'd maybe have them in 4th, but before these recent ads, I would maybe have had Hamilton down in the 7th or 8th ranking. So they've moved way up with these additions. And again, I think fans in Hamilton, maybe they shouldn't be like jumping for joy, but they certainly shouldn't be jumping into pits of despair either. I think they can have cooler heads prevail and go, okay, we're going to be just fine. This team knows what it's doing. We're going to be a good team again in 2026.
And the name that we didn't talk about that I think deserves a mention here as well, Mario Alford. He may be 34 years old next year, but he showed with the Riders in 2025 that when he's healthy, he can still play. I'm sure the Ticats would like to find a young option to keep on the practice squad in case he goes down, but that takes the pressure off of losing Isaiah Wooden, who was such a huge part of the team's success last year in terms of what he could do as a return man on special teams. Alfred's a plug-and-play guy who's still at the very top of his game despite his age. I really like that addition as well.
Well,
that's a good note, JC. I still think he has some juice. And Hodge, you go. I got a couple more things.
Well, I was just going to say, I think when Dre McCray, a rookie for the Riders, had a really good performance in the preseason, and we speculated that maybe McCray could be the guy and Alford would be out, I had some sources leading me to believe that made its way to Mario, and he was not happy about that and used it as motivation. So, hey, if it helps Mario to get motivated, then for his sake, I'll say this. You suck, Mario. You're really slow and you're terrible and you can't play anymore. Use it. Use it. You're going to be all CFL.
Perhaps that motivation helps Mario go from just Mario to Super Mario.
Bingo.
It's like the little...
There's a couple of points I want to hit on, though, fellas, because I think, first of all, fans do this when games are on. The first quarter happens and their team is down, like let's say 10-0 or 7-0, whatever the score is. They're freaking out if one team has some momentum to start the game. Football is 60 minutes, okay? Same for the communication and CFL free agency. You need to let it play out in its entirety. So the Ticats fans, and I appreciate them being passionate, who were constantly asking me for updates about the Ticats, I wasn't going to give them, but I did say, be patient. The Tiger Cats, from what I had heard consistently, were working behind the scenes. It wasn't like they were just watching CFL free agency and letting it pass by. And now you have seen what the team was working on and the plan that they had after the Edmonton Elks took, notably, a bunch of their players. So let's just make sure in the future that I get it. Everybody's excited. You want to see your team sign some players. And even in the communication window, Whit McManus was a big one. And Trey Ford prior to that, another biggie. But there was more to it. So let's let it unfold overall. I asked you guys last week, and I think it's fair to bring it up again. If the Ottawa Redblacks and the Hamilton Tiger Cats played on a neutral field, now that we see everything that the Ticats have done, 2 questions. Who would be the favorite, according to the odds makers, and who would you pick to win?
Hamilton and Hamilton.
I would go Hamilton and Hamilton as well. I'm not as confident as I was last season. I do think the Red Blacks have gotten significantly better, but to me, with what they've added, they're good enough now, and it comes down to who has the better quarterback at that stage. And I think Bo Levi Mitchell will elevate his team far more than Drew Brown will elevate the Red Blacks.
Yeah, I'm high on what the Red Blacks defense is going to be able to do after a down year in 2025. I like the talent they've added there. I think their receiving core is very good, especially post the addition of Aiden Eberhardt. But yeah, I think at the quarterback position, the Ticats are better. I think their receiving core is better by a little bit than Ottawa's. I'm really high on Greg Bell. I will say that. I know J.C. is a clown who doesn't think that running backs matter, but I do. And I think Greg Bell, and actually Ryan Dinwiddie, in speaking to TSN 1200, I thought offered some tremendous insight as to what a pass-catching running back can mean in an offense. And he talked about how when he was in Toronto, guys like Andrew Harris and AJ Ouellette and Kadeem Carey really added an element that was missing from that offense in 25. And that was part of the reason for their protection issues. Because if you're just blocking with 5 time and time again, and you're limited in how you can use your running back as a protector and as a pass catcher, it's easy for defenses to key in on certain things, and right, just not as multiple. You don't have to keep defenses as honest as they otherwise would be. So I think it'd be close, but like, I'm not going to sit here in February and say, yeah, I'm going to be all in on the Red Blacks before I've even seen them on the field. I'm going to go with the Tabbies in both cases. But do I think that it would be a blowout? No. Like, I think the Red Blacks are a much better football team, but I want to see how it looks on the field come certainly May, and then we'll get into beyond that, June, July, etc.
The major point being that the Red Blacks have closed the gap, and in 2024, it was the Red Blacks in the playoffs, albeit not first place, and the Ticats who were last in the East Division when Bo Levi Mitchell threw for 5,000 yards. So this league can come at you in a hurry. I think the East Division is going to be fun to watch along with the West Division. There's a lot of talented teams, and just because your team didn't do much in free agency, and I'm talking about the BC Lions and then the Montreal Alouettes, doesn't mean that they're not going to be competitive. Okay, Trey Ford talked about how much talent he believes the BC Lions have, and we've discussed Danny Machocha and his approach to signing players to early extensions. And if your team's not doing that much in free agency and just trying to retain your own players, that probably means you're pretty good, which I think a lot of people in Saskatchewan need to realize, that even though some, yes, key starters have left, there is something called the salary cap. And I find it hilarious, fellas, when teams like Edmonton and Ottawa, and even Winnipeg to a degree, are going on spending sprees. And we hear these fans from the other fan bases say, well, what about the salary cap? Where are they getting this money? If you just look at the breakdown, you could understand why, especially for Ottawa. They have the 9th highest paid starting quarterback in the league in Drew Brown. So there are some funds available, and we're going to break down some of the financial details. Hodge, you have it for Winnipeg specifically with their additions there, but every team's largely working off the same cap, and it is very rare for a team like the BC Lions in 2024 to say, screw the cap, and Amar Doman pays all kinds of money just to try to win a home Grey Cup, which doesn't work out. Just because you spend money also doesn't mean that you're going to win the Grey Cup. There's so much else that goes into it.
Yeah, and this is an oversimplification because, of course, there's guys making big money who don't always produce. There's guys on rookie deals who are all-stars. But as a general rule of thumb, the teams that have more money to spend have that because they have fewer talented players. Period. Right? So if you've got money to spend, it's because you looked at your own guys and went, we can do better than this. Let's go get somebody else's players, right? So there's a reason why teams at the bottom of the standings are a lot more active than the teams at the top. But I digress. After the CFL free agent frenzy has come and gone, I think it's time that we analyze the process by which these moves are made. After a flurry of activity in the communication window, mostly made the opening of CFL free agency an afterthought, there's speculation that CFL Commissioner Stuart Johnston could do away with the legal tampering period and potentially move free agency up in the off-season calendar. Do you think that would be a smart decision?
I think there's two elements at play here, and the intelligence of the decision is different for both of them. The first part of this is the communication window doing what it was supposed to do? And the answer to that is simply no, right? The idea was that this was going to remove the image from the league that there was tampering happening, and it was going to clean up that image and make free agency better, smoother, more efficient. All it's done is move free agency up 10 days earlier because teams are doing those deals at the start of the window. There is still tampering happening behind the scenes before the window opens. Everyone knows it. It's just a part of the reality of professional sports. And the window itself has largely become irrelevant, right? It's just something that draws out the period of free agency. There's not a ton of additional moves that are made after day one or day two. And it really took a lot of the shine off of the day that the league is advertising as the start of free agency, in my opinion, because so many of the moves that were being announced had already been announced a week before as an agreed to terms contract. To me, you either eliminate that entirely or you shorten the window to 1 or 2 days, similar to what it is in the NFL, where I believe it's 48 hours, that legal tampering window down south. I think that would be a nice sweet spot for the league to go to and make free agency more condensed and engaging. On the other side, do we move up the calendar? I don't think you want to do that dramatically. I've heard people put out the idea that it should be January 1st. To me, you shouldn't have it during the holiday season. And I actually think the day that the window opened this year was a perfect place for it on that Pro Bowl weekend in the NFL, which is essentially irrelevant these days because of what that game has become. And before the Super Bowl, you slip it in sort of the dead spot in the news cycle. You get hard and fast with a lot of news before the Super Bowl, and you keep your fans engaged for longer, because if you move it up closer to the end of the season, December or January, what are you doing to fill the time for the rest of the offseason? The CFL struggles enough with that as it is. They don't do enough to market their other marquee events in the offseason, like the Combine and the Draft. So if you don't have free agency in February, I think you're ceding more ground than you're gaining interest in that particular scenario.
I'll put forth a radical idea, fellas. Let's ask the general managers, the players, perhaps the agents, and see what they think before anything is done. I get that there is a marketing aspect to this, but something like having free agency on January 1, the holiday point is definitely valid, but I think people across the league, and I've talked to some people about this, they would tell you that that is way too fast, way too quick. There is a period in there from, roughly January 1st to January 15th every year where some key re-signings happen. Mm-hmm. So I would want to hear what the actual people in the trenches think, the people that are building these teams, the players that are having to go through these decisions, and honestly, the agents as well, I think should have a voice, because the CFL, as JC noted, has an issue in the offseason staying relevant. But we know the one way that it does move the needle is the re-signing and free agency process. So I think the way that it fell this year was probably just random, but the fact that it was on that Sunday where the Pro Bowl actually wasn't played, the Pro Bowl games, which is now a flag football game and dodgeball and a bunch of other stuff, was on Tuesday night. So there was nothing going on that Sunday. And we can only speak from our perspective, fellas, but if you look at the metrics from 3DownNation.com on that Sunday, that was a major traffic spike. In fact, we don't have the data as far back as since when the site started, but from my research, that was our highest trafficked day that we've had looking at the metrics that we can go far back on. So I think that actually the way that happened worked out well for the CFL because it was so quiet. And I don't necessarily even think that because it's Super Bowl week, that takes away a lot of attention from the Canadian Football League. Just look at the Super Bowl ratings that fell. Okay, I think that might have to do a little bit with what's going on politically based on some social media comments. But I think in actuality, it allows the CFL to stand out because you don't have a whole bunch of NFL playoff games going on. By then, by and large part, the coaching searches, if there are any, and there were 10 this year in the NFL, are mostly, if not all but done by that time. So the CFL can actually really shine. Now, I think you have to make sure you hit that date every year, but I also think it allows teams to go through a thoughtful process and the players as well, because naturally you have the Grey Cup, there's the CFL potential general manager cycle, the coaching cycle that gets shored up, which goes into December, the majority of seasons. And then you have those staffs come together to be able to make decisions on who to re-sign and where to allot their money. So I actually think for the majority of the way that it's set up, the calendar works out very well for the CFL and the teams to make well thought out decisions. I'm not saying that we shouldn't change it, but I also don't think change for the sake of change is good. As for the communication window, I'll agree with JC. I think it should be condensed. I think it should be smaller. I don't necessarily know if 48 hours is the right amount of time there. I do think it has a purpose in some form or fashion. Just look at Wynton McManus. It took him a number of days to agree to terms with the Hamilton Tiger Cats because there was a process that he was going through there. And you hear about teams calling players right at 12 o'clock when the communication window opens. And the players that are largely sought after have a bunch of scheduled calls with teams, with head coaches, with general managers, with position coaches, with perhaps coordinators. So I think it is still valid in that form. I just think you probably need to condense it down so you can actually have that legal time where the players and the teams who are chasing those players, the pending free agents, can talk and interact. I think it's actually really critical for the process. So I would rather hear some ideas from the GMs and the head coaches around the league before any decision is made. And I definitely don't want it to be a half-baked one because I did hear around the league this year that Stuart Johnston and the league office were actually considering changing it on the fly this year.
Oh, boy.
I don't understand how you would do that when you look at the contracts and the offseason bonus dates that are designed around free agency to potentially let players get free if they are released. So let's take a longer look at this and actually speak to those involved, because I think by and large part, the date that it landed on this year actually happened to be really good for the CFL. And some people are out here saying it's a mess and it needs to be overhauled and everything. Just understand, when the communication window opens, and perhaps it's going to be changed, that's essentially the start of CFL free agency. Like, get with the program here. Keep up with the changes.
Yeah, I think the hope with the window is that you could take a day-long event, which is what free agency typically was, and turn it into a week-long event. And I think it was successful right at the start, when it was in its infancy, the first few years of the window. You know, like day one of the window, there'd be very little news. Day two, be like, okay, this guy's, talking to 4 teams. This other player's talking to 5 teams. Oh, this guy's making progress on an extension, but you got there's rumors that this other team is making a strong push, and over the years, that type of reporting has gone away and away and away as these agreements have been reached earlier and earlier and earlier. And I think everybody knows that a lot of these agreements start before the window technically opens, right? And one thing I will say is I feel like there's a perception maybe from some people that like, oh, tampering happens in the CFL and not other leagues, and that means the CFL's Bush League. I have had communication and conversations with many veteran NFL agents who have clients making $10-20 million a year, and I've said,
every league.
Hypothetically, I'm like this is what it's like in the CFL. Does that sound anything like what happens down south? And they just start to laugh, and they're like, yeah, it happens all the time that you're at the Senior Bowl and someone says, hey, hypothetically, if you had a player who fit this mold at this position, what hypothetically would you want for that player? Oh, like these types of conversations happen at every single league. It's not exclusive to the CFL. I'm not saying there's nothing about the CFL that's Bush League, but this is not a fair criticism to say that it's Bush League. And I think the window, the proper solution for me, and I agree with Justin, you need to go through the proper channels and talk to these people. But I think the best solution is just say, hey, free agency has no more window, or maybe there's a 48-hour window right before it starts. But I think a late January start to free agency still makes sense. And one of the reasons I say that is one thing the CFL does not control at all is the NFL window, right? The CFL season ends halfway through November, and then once December starts, you often see, somewhere between 20 and 25 different CFL players get NFL workouts. And if you suddenly say, oh, CFL free agency starts on January 1st, it's like, well, whoa, hold on. We have 3 guys who are still pursuing NFL opportunities.
Oh, it's more than that.
Well, I just mean like
you
if
can't
you're
even sign until mid-January.
Well, I'm just saying if you're a specific team, you might say, well, we have 3 players just on our team who are trying out the NFL, and there's 6 other guys trying the NFL who, if they make it to free agency, we would have interest in. And if all of a sudden January 1st hits and it's CFL free agency, it's like, well, now you're like trying to build your roster for the next year, but simultaneously like not being able to get confirmation one way or another of, is this guy even going to sign a CFL contract? Is he not? Is this guy going to be back on our team? Is he not? Right. And looking at the NFL signings that happened, like Damien Alford officially signed with the Saints on January 7th. Robert Carter Jr. officially signed with the Colts on January 8th. Nick Constantinou signed officially with the Browns on January 9th. Like, if you have signings going into the second week of January, I don't know how you start CFL free agency that early. Maybe January 15th. But again, I think for the reasons you laid out, which is really smart, it's nice to fill that void between the championship round in the NFL and the Super Bowl, right? I think that's a great window rather than sticking it in the middle of January when you've got the NFL playoffs arguably at its best. Like I honestly am kind of over the NFL hype by Super Bowl. I'm kind of like, the best weeks of the playoffs are the divisional and the conference round. It's not the Super Bowl itself. But anyway, I think changing it is smart. I think moving it up is smart, but I don't think you need to drastically change it. And I don't think you have to move it up like crazy, especially because I think, as you very smartly laid out, the CFL gets hype in December for coaching changes. January is re-signings. February is free agency. March is the combine. It flows pretty nice. And if anything, the league needs to maximize its coverage. And if you're moving free agency to like January 1st or that early, yeah, like what gets you through February? What for the month of February is anybody checking in on the CFL for? I think that would be a big concern for me if the CFL said, yeah, let's move free agency up a whole bunch. It's like, well, what's going to keep your fans engaged beyond that point?
I do want to add one more element to this conversation because you brought up January 15th as a potential date, and that date already has some significance to the CFL calendar. Do you know what it is, Hodge?
I feel like there is something, but I don't know what it is off the top of my head.
Well, it's the deadline that the league is supposed to submit the financials for the revenue growth model to the CFLPA.
Of
So if
course.
you're doing free agency on January 1st, you don't know what your salary cap is unless you're going to move up your timeline on that. The league has a hard enough time meeting their deadlines for financials as it currently stands. So I would not want to be in a scenario, and we experienced it last year, where teams are trying to sign players without knowing how much money they have to spend or understanding the salary cap. Don't make that an annual occurrence. That would be ridiculous. Currently, the model and the calendar sets up nicely. We dealt with that problem this year. Everyone understood what they had in the bank to be able to spend. We don't want to go back in time on that.
Look at fellas, we've had conversation for a few minutes here and already figured out some of the pitfalls. If some of the people on the outside who are talking loudly about changing this to January 1st would just step back and understand some of these key issues, and JC's might be the top one, then you would realize, yeah, maybe that's not actually feasible. And let's go through a few more here, okay? From a news standpoint, the CFL has the winter meetings in early January, and the majority of the conversation around those meetings, yes, has to do with rules, but also deals with players who either have re-signed with their teams or speculation about where those contract discussions are at. And largely speculation drives engagement. So I think when you look at all of these factors, and JC, I think the one you just laid out is elite with the salary cap. And there's some others I know that we're forgetting here within this conversation, but it just doesn't make much sense. And also, the CFL cannot be compared to these other leagues, okay? In the NFL, there are college scouts and pro scouts. So there was one media member in particular talking about the NFL schedule, saying you got the Super Bowl and then a few weeks later, you got free agency. Well, how are you going to do that in the CFL when you have a football operations cap that literally limits the amount of people in the building to prepare for free agency and then shift focus to the draft? Whereas in the NFL, you have literal entire departments.
They're still on the All-Star circuit on January 1. Like, they're still
Great
on the
point.
road.
Focus in the NFL. You have these departments focused on just the pro scouting, which is for free agency and signing players and watching the wire and probably a bunch of things I don't even know. And you have a college scouting department. In the CFL, you have people doing not just multiple roles, like literally everything, right? Jeremy O'Day was on the road, as you said, JC, scouting in Alabama and did his pre-free agency press conference from the road. And he's a general manager. So let's think about this from a holistic perspective and not make a snap judgment. Because this year it actually worked out. And this is what I'm getting at. Talk to the people who are involved. JC's point is just so smart. Unless the CFL, which again is a smaller league and has a small league office, is going to turn around the books even faster than January 15th, how the heck are you going to start CFL free agency on January 1st? Some people need to give their head a shake and understand the timing of some of this, plus the marketing aspect to it. I get it from some standpoints, and we all want to get better and improve and change and evolve. But when you start lining some of these things up, I just can't understand how you could even spout out of your mouth that January 1st would be smart to start CFL free agency.
Financial details are being reported, mostly by 3DownNation, for free agent signings across the league, including some jaw droppers. The Edmonton Elks made Malik Carney the highest paid American defensive player in the salary cap era, while Coulter Woodmansey is now the highest paid offensive lineman. The Ottawa Redblacks shelled out to make A.J. Allen the highest paid linebacker and Greg Bell the highest paid American running back. Which one of those deals is the most worth it, and which is the most questionable?
It's easy, the one that's the most worth it. A.J. Allen, Canadian ratio changer at the weak side linebacker position. I've heard from people in the league on different sides of the fence on this. Some people don't see the value of a Canadian will and don't believe it's a ratio changer. And some people do. Obviously, the Ottawa Red Blacks feel that way. But for Allen in particular, the guy's 27 years old, is just reaching the prime of his career, which he could have easily for at least 2 seasons, where the Red Blacks are paying him $240,000 in hard money in 2026 and $250,000 in hard money in 2027. So I think you could get the value out of AJ Allen, and he's Canadian. I do think it makes sense for the Elks to go and beef up their defensive line with Malik Carney and, some of the other reported dollars that we have put out there, especially for all these guys. These are all exclusively reported by 3DownNation. So I'll say my most worth it one is AJ Allen. The second question is very difficult to answer. And I think it depends on how you value the positions. Like Coulter Woodmansey getting $300,000 is a little bit, I think, of him being lucky in the sense that he was the only legitimate starting Canadian offensive lineman that got to the market, which required a premium. I'm not saying he's not worth that, but people around the league would tell you that there are other offensive linemen that are better than Coulter Woodmansey. So I'm not saying that is the one that's the most questionable, but I think it's hard to pick out because you look at all of these guys. Greg Bell, for example, had a market out there of at least 3 teams. So that's going to drive up his price tag. He's coming off a 1,000-yard rushing season and leading the league in reception. So if Ryan Dinwiddie feels like that adds a value to his offense, I'm not necessarily going to argue with him, particularly because I don't want to get kicked in the face when he's celebrating or telling me how important Greg Bell is to his offense. So I'm going to have to think about it a little more for that second answer.
Fence sitter.
Look, I think you can make an argument for a bunch of different guys. Like, and one thing I will say quickly, I was having a laugh the other day because do you guys remember this would be back in 2016? I believe it was 2016. And Chris Jones was the incoming general manager and head coach for the Saskatchewan Roughriders. And he went out and he signed like the biggest, hottest free agent that year, who was Derek Dennis of the Calgary Stampeders, who was coming off a Most Outstanding Offensive Lineman award. Do you guys remember what ridiculous number was paid to Derek Dennis that made everybody lose their mind? This is 10 years ago. Do you remember?
I think it was $150,000.
JC?
I don't recall.
Okay. The answer is 180. So obviously the cap was significantly lower then. And this is something that I'd like to do a little more reporting on because I think sometimes we have like benchmarks in our mind for like, oh, well, this a player of this type is worth 120 and this one is 150 and this guy's 210. And then somebody like Coulter Woodmansey is like, yeah, making 300. And it's like, whoa, like how could you pay? And it's like, well, remember, if the cap has gone up significantly, obviously the money that's allocated to this type of player is going to go up, significantly, or one would think roughly in proportion for at least how much the cap has gone up. So yeah, I think $300,000 for Coulter Woodmansey is more than he's probably worth. But I also think it illustrates how much you have to pay to get a player out of a good situation. Like Coulter Woodmansey grew up in the GTA, has been with the Ticats for 5 years. His family's in the GTA. He's won a bunch of games with the Ticats. One would think, and this was the case with Robbie Smith, I believe, a year ago, another kind of career or lifelong Southern Ontario guy. He, in his case, played at Wilfrid Laurier. Woodmansey played collegiately at Guelph. If you want to pry a guy out of that part of the country and have them move all the way to Edmonton, a city that is a cold weather city, right? Gets chilly in the wintertime, all those things. And at least off the field is certainly not doing as well as the Ticats right now. You're going to have to pay through the nose. So I also understand it from Edmonton's side. And obviously, as we know with Ed Hervey, with Robbie Smith last year, Coulter Woodmansey this year, Malik Carney this year, he's more than happy to pay through the nose if you play along the offensive or defensive lines. It's something that Hervey has always been very upfront about. In terms of guys who are super worth it, I mean, there's a few candidates for this one. One I would throw out there would be Jonathan Moxey. $135,000 is not cheap for a corner, but I think for an all-star caliber defensive back who fills a huge need for the Blue Bombers, that would be one. Moxey is going to be the fourth highest paid guy in Winnipeg secondary, and I think he's a guy who could start for anybody in the CFL and be a difference maker for a lot of them. So he's somebody I'd throw out for a value signing.
Let's get this squared away with these four. They're all being overpaid to some degree. That's just the reality of free agency. When there are few players on the market and lots of teams want you to fill a spot, you're going to command more money and teams are going to overpay. This discussion is about the degree to which the overpay is worth it. And I think, to me, the one who is most worth it is Malik Carney. I believe he is an elite edge rusher in the CFL, even though he doesn't necessarily have the all-star nods or the sack totals. I think on a down-to-down consistency base, he is as disruptive as anybody out there. I think he is the most worth it. From there, I would go to A.J. Allen because of all the reasons that you laid out, Dunk. I think he is a ratio-breaking talent. I think he's going to bring a lot of value to the Ottawa Redblacks. I would then go to Coulter Woodmansey, who I think is a very, very good guard, but probably won't be the best offensive lineman on his own team, despite being paid as the highest offensive lineman in the entire league. That, to me, is a bit more of an overpay than the other two, but again, you're getting a very, very good player. And last, the least worth it of the four that we've laid out here is Greg Bell to me, because I hate running backs, and you guys have praised me for all my smart takes, so I thought I'd do a real stupid one now and get all your derision right at this time. I like Greg Bell a lot as a player. I think he's got tremendous upside. I think he's going to be great in Ryan Digweed's offense. I don't know that he is the best American running back in the league. There's a couple of guys that I would take above him. Justin Rankin is at the top of my list. I probably would take Dedrick Mills as well above him. I know he brings more value as a pass catcher than either of those guys. I also think he's got more limitations as a pass protector than some other American running backs in the league, and that has to be taken into consideration as well. It's just not money that I would be comfortable paying at that position. No knock on Bell as a talent, but to me, of those four, he is the most questionable signing.
I think it depends how you look at it with Greg Bell, because Brady Oliveira, and yes, there's the Canadian factor, is going to make, roughly $115,000 more than Greg Bell in 2026. And I get it, the Canadian factor, hometown boy. But I think of one of the points that you guys made in terms of having to overpay to get these guys out of a good situation, because that was arguably the case with Greg Bell in Hamilton, coming off a 1,000-yard season, 62 catches on a team that was first place in the East. For him to go to the last place team, you're going to have to overpay him. So I don't think any of these are necessarily like egregious, but I think the one that just, jumps out to me is Coulter Woodmansey, because I think if you lined him up against a lot of the other highest paid offensive linemen, I'm trying to get off the fence here, JC, he wouldn't be worth that much money. And that's no slight, and I'm being hard on my University of Guelph guy, Drink, but I think that's the one that sticks out most to me. I'm not saying he's not going to be worth it. I understand Ed Hervey building on the trenches, and man, Ed Hervey is an absolute quote machine. And I just love his honesty about free agency and wanting to whoop these teams and getting rid of the stench that was in Edmonton. Like, wow, this guy is unbelievable. You got to love the truth factor from Ed Hervey. So I'll go with A.J. Allen as my most worth it, and Coulter Woodmansey. Both Guelph guys, actually. Drink again for the questionable.
JC has another segment here. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. I got a time crunch. I'll let you guys to talk about Maxime Royer when I'm gone. We'll hit Hodge's heritage moment quick in the 3-minute drill. On this day in 2020, the Ticats signed receiver DeVere Posey as a free agent. The 2017 Grey Cup MVP was coming off a solid year with the Montreal Alouettes, during which he recorded 50 receptions for 780 yards and 3 touchdowns over 12 games. Posey never got a chance to suit up for the star-studded Ticats in 2020, however, due to the cancellation of the season amid the COVID-19 pandemic. He ended up being cut by Hamilton in 2021 before a brief stint with the BC Lions, and then was out of the league. I don't know about you guys. DeVere Posey, great peak, right, with the Toronto Argonauts winning that Grey Cup MVP, but he's one of those guys where I feel like 20 years from now, when you look back at the list of Grey Cup MVPs, you're going to be like, who's DeVere Posey?
I mean, I think that's a fair assessment. I will say DeVere Posey has a special place in my heart. He's a guy I got to know a little bit during his time in BC. I was coaching Pee-wee football, 11-year-olds out in the west side of Vancouver, and he was buddies from college with the guy I was coaching with. So he used to come out to our games, and we'd have beers and cigars in the parking lot after victories with the Grey Cup MVP. So that was a good time when I was in university with DeVere Posey.
DeVere Posey will always be remembered for that snow globe Grey Cup touchdown pass, a bomb from Ricky Ray. And then also, did you guys know he was a published author on 3DownNation?
I'd forgotten that. I'll have to double check DeVere Posey's work. I'll say
he wrote about the week and what it took to become the Grey Cup MVP.
He's certainly a better writer than I am a receiver. I'll give him credit for that.
That's fair.
Let's go to the 3-minute drill.
Former CFL Most Outstanding Defensive Player Lorenzo Malden IV has signed with the Louisville Kings in the United Football League. Can you believe he's gone from the Canadian Football League?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's past his prime, and I mean, I'm not saying that in a jerk way. He's been on the decline. His stats show that, but I actually love this for him because he was a stud at Louisville in college, so it's kind of a homecoming for him late in his career. I think it's a great fit for all parties. 2 Canadian prospects were invited to the 2026 NFL Combine. Miami defensive lineman Akeem Mesidor and Boston College offensive lineman Logan Taylor. Were there any snubs, JC?
I don't think there was any snubs. These are the 2 top Canadian guys by a wide margin. You could make an argument for Wesley Bailey, Renee Conga, even Rohan Jones, but I think they got this right. These are the Combine caliber guys. Former CFL player and coach Craig Butler has joined the staff at Western University, where he'll serve as the defensive backs coach and an assistant on defense and special teams. Is that a smart hire?
It is, but I might be biased because I actually played against Craig Butler when he was at Western as a standout defensive back, and everybody knows where I played my collegiate football. The Blue Bombers brought back veteran defensive back Canadian Nick Hallett for 2026, as first reported by our own Johnny Hodge. Was that a good move?
In fairness, I reported they were talking, and then the team announced the re-signing. So I think you're exaggerating a little. But yeah, I think it's a good move. He's got 80 special teams tackles in 100 games. He's just one of those glue guys who I think helps make your CFL team better. He's not a star, never will be, but he's a valuable part of that locker room. Longtime BC broadcaster Jim Robson passed away at age 91. JC, how will you remember him?
As a legend. Obviously, he retired before my time in 1999. I was 2 years old. I wasn't even living in BC yet, but his aura has always permeated BC sports. I didn't even realize he called the Lions before he called the Canucks until he had passed away, a living legend in a number of different sports out here. The Saskatchewan Roughriders signed global linebacker Tyron Vrede after a 5-year stint with the Red Blacks. How will he fit in Riderville?
I think he fits well. They lost Habakak Baldonado, who signed with the Red Blacks, so they could use a legitimate global who has started games at middle linebacker for the Ottawa Red Blacks behind Jameer Thurman, and perhaps he challenges for some reps at that weak side linebacker spot. There's going to be a competition. I think that's probably a low chance, but I think he fits in on the roster in Saskatchewan well. Winnipeg signed veteran linebacker Jovan Santos Knox, as our Johnny Hodge first reported. Am I correct this time?
Well, I didn't post the story until it got announced, but yeah, I knew it was happening.
Okay, there we go. Following his release from the Ottawa Red Blacks, does he fit with the Blue Bombers.
Yeah, and Kyle Walters, the team's general manager, talked about it publicly today, saying it's going to be a competition. The team has Tony Jones and Kyrie Wilson as incumbent starters, but Santos Knox, I thought, was an excellent player for the Red Blacks in 25. So will be interesting to see that competition come training camp. The Canadian ratings for the Super Bowl 60 fell 20% year over year. Did that surprise you?
It did not. Obviously, there's a political element, as Dunk alluded to here, but also this game was a snooze fest. I love defensive football. I liked seeing the schemes, but most people aren't nerds. They want to see an exciting, high-scoring game. This wasn't that. At least we got a shout-out from Bad Bunny, guys. The Saskatchewan Roughriders have signed former NFL receiver Freddie Swain. Could he potentially crack their starting lineup?
There's a possibility. It's clear if you look at the Riders' depth chart, which keep your eyes locked to 3DownNation.com for a full breakdown, that there's going to be a starting receiver spot up for grabs. And it probably will be American, if I can spit some words out. So he'll be in the mix along with a lot of other talent that the Riders believe they've brought in there to battle it out in training camp. The CFL has created the Ted Gavaya Football Operations Award, which will be given out at the CFL Combine in Edmonton in March. You guys are going to be there. Is that a great initiative?
It is. And look, as a member of the media, I'm supposed to be impartial. I'm not going to pretend to be impartial on this. I'm a proud member of Team Ted. University of Toronto standout and BC Lions CFL draft pick Lucas Stoikos is set to compete in the bobsleigh at the Olympics in Italy. Do you think he'll win a medal for Canada?
I think that's probably a long shot, but this is a hell of an accomplishment for a guy who's straight out of the University of Toronto, was cut in training camp by the BC Lions, one of four former CFL players, I should say 3 former CFL players, 1 current CFL player that are competing in the bobsleigh. Maybe somebody makes the podium. Former CFL player and longtime collegiate and amateur coach Jabari Arthur is joining the coaching staff with the Edmonton Elks. Do you have any more details?
You know it. He'll be the running backs coach there, and he's got a connection with Mark Killam going back through the years because Arthur coached at the University of Calgary, which shares a facility at McMahon Stadium with the Stampeders. So that connection results in a job for Arthur with the Elks. In a move, John Hodge was indeed the first to report. Football Canada and Executive Director Kevin McDonald have parted ways. What does that mean for the organization?
It means the organization is a mess, unfortunately. Van Gay Cup winning quarterback Evan Hillock signed with the St. Joseph Goats of the Arena Football League. Do you think he'll become the Goats' GOAT?
That's an interesting proposition. I mean, Rakeem Cato, former CFL quarterback, formerly quarterbacked the Goats 2 years ago, so I don't know how he performed. There's certainly some Goats in ownership. Christian Okoye, the Nigerian Nightmare, is one of the co-owners, as well as Garage Beer, which is owned by the Kelsey brothers. Darian Durant said on the Sports Cage that he didn't talk to Andy Fantuz for 4 years after he left the Rough Riders for the Tiger Cats in 2011 CFL free agency. Would you refuse to talk to Hodge if he left for another media outlet?
It depends which outlet and for how much money. I could understand if he was getting the big old bag, which is essentially what Andy Fantuz got from the Tiger Cats on that contract. I think it was $185,000 in hard money with some additional incentives possible for Fantuz. So I get it. Legendary QB Doug Flutie weighed in on the CFL's structural rule changes. He doesn't like them and said it's an attempt to Americanize the Canadian game. He actually did say that, for real. Is that a bad look for the league?
Yeah, it's bad PR when the best player ever to be in your league says you're making mistakes, obviously. And Doug Flutie, by the way, is entitled to his opinion. And anybody who's like, oh, well, Doug Flutie's an idiot. I'm sorry. If you think Doug Flutie's an idiot, in my opinion, then you're an idiot. Like, give me a break. Doug Flutie is a legend. He's entitled to his opinion. Seattle receiver Cooper Kupp said his Eastern Washington University quarterback Vernon Adams Jr. exemplified Seattle's Super Bowl mantra of loose and focused. Is that how you would describe VA?
I think it is now. Earlier on in his career, certainly not how I would have described VA, particularly the loose part. He was very tight at times, but now he's grown, he's matured. I think he is pretty much loose and focused all the time. Former Calgary Stampeders QB turned Pro Bowler Jeff Garcia believes there is not a lot that separates CFL and NFL players in terms of talent. Is he right, Dunk?
I mean, he's been a star in the CFL and, as you alluded to, a Pro Bowler in the NFL. So I'm going to take his word. And plus, we've heard Chad Johnson say this. Johnny Manziel got a whole dose of welcome to the CFL in his stint up here, along with a number of other big name NCAA players that have come north of the border, or NFL players that have come up here as well. It ain't no joke, the talent in Canada. The Ottawa Redblacks have signed former Arizona Cardinals second-round pick, receiver Andy Isabella. He made over $10 million in the NFL USD, that is. What are his chances to make the roster in the nation's capital?
I think they're a pretty long shot. He wouldn't be penciled in as a starter, certainly right away. He has upside. This is a guy who was a consensus All-American in college for UMass, but really didn't pan out at all in the NFL, was considered a major bust, has not played in a couple of years. Guys with that profile typically do not find success when they try their hand at the CFL. For his sake, I'm hoping I'm wrong and Andy Isabella turns into a star, but I'm not holding my breath.
Let's see what happens. John Hodge has exited the stage, so let's go to this topic. Linebacker Maxime Roy was granted a one-time exemption to turn his status from global, right up JC's alley, to national in the Canadian Football League. He has since re-signed with the BC Lions. How did that happen, and do you agree with the change that was allowed?
Well, essentially, Roy and the team, the Lions as well, were involved in this process, approached the league and the CFLPA, wondering if anything could be done about changing his status, because he is the only U Sports alumni currently in the CFL who does not count as a national based on the definition that was put in the newest collective bargaining agreement, which is if you play 3 years at a U Sports school and you graduate from that institution, you become a national regardless of your citizenship. That rule came into effect after Royer graduated from McGill and had entered the CFL via the 2019 CFL European draft. That's why he is always counted as global, but they felt that this was unfair, and they looked to have it changed. The CFLPA and the CFL struck a one-time deal on this, that Royer, who, for the record, is BC's CFLPA team rep, could now count essentially as a Canadian. In terms of Royer's status, I'm happy that he got this change. I think it makes a lot of sense that he shouldn't be treated any differently because of the time he came into the league, that other people fit this definition. I support them fitting that definition, and therefore it should be applied equally to him. However, I think the fact that this is a one-time exception is absolutely bogus, and I'll tell you why. There are significant problems right now with the way that the global program is administrated in the CFL. Most of all, teams are not allowed to play more than 2 globals on the active roster. Even if they wanted to replace an American, which was originally the team's interpretation that they could play more if they simply counted as an American, they cannot, because the CFLPA has come out and said you cannot play any more than 2 because that denies our American members their roster spots. That limits the ability of global players to rise in the CFL, to earn their opportunities, and even if they are better than American talent, if they're the 3rd best global on their team, which is very reasonable considering some of the talent that we have there in terms of punters and guys like Habakkuk Baldonado who have established themselves as potential starters, they can't make it onto the field. The fact that those players are not allowed to switch their status up to count as Americans to potentially better their career, but somebody like Maxime Roy is allowed to now count as a national and potentially extend his career when he was facing the same limitations as a global, is fundamentally unfair to me. So I don't have a problem with Royer getting this exception, but I think the CFL and the CFLPA both need to take a long, hard look at themselves and wonder if they are truly administrating this program in a way that is getting the most value out of it and is being fair to these players.
Great reporting on the story, JC. And some people might be like, well, why do we care about this? But it was among our highest read stories in a week where there was the communication window and CFL free agency. So definitely a unique story. And I think, honestly, if you're going to make a one-time change, that's prejudice in the future for it to potentially happen again. So to your point, JC, I think that the PA and the league office should get together and look at this entire program as a whole, and then also the potential for some of the globals to flip to nationals and get it sorted out. That's something that could definitely help, but I thought you did a great job on the story, getting the details, and it's a really unique one that, I don't even think has happened in the CFL. Largely it's been, if you come in as a global, a national, or an American, that's what you are. So to my knowledge, it's the first of its kind.
Yeah, my understanding is it's entirely unprecedented. You are supposed to come in however you are set up when you enter the CFL is how you last for your entire career. And there are plenty of cases where guys have had that. Josh Bartel, punter for Saskatchewan a number of years ago. He was an Australian who counted as a national because at that time, if you hadn't played in the United States, you automatically became a Canadian. And so he spent his entire career as a Canadian, even though in 2014, in year 3 of his career, they changed that rule. So he would have counted as an American at that point. Boris Bede is the other one. Of course, the French kicker, trained in France, went to the University of Laval. At various points, he could have counted as a global in 2019 or as a national by way of the same rule that Royer just became a national because he attended Laval for 3 years and graduated. But he was always counted as an American. And frankly, if he had either of those other two definitions, global or national, he's probably still playing in the CFL. The fact that he was an American was a major hurdle for him. So if I'm Boris Bede, and I know he's moved on to the next phase of his life, but I'm going to the league and saying, hey, change my status now, or maybe I'm filing a lawsuit because frankly, if you're going to do it for one player, you've got to do it for everybody, and you've got to handle this situation better going forward.
That's what I mean. It could just be the start. Boris Bede is certainly a great example of that. Let's get to JC's random neglister.
Well, I gave the BC Lions a lot of flack last week because they did not have a great backup QB situation. Chase Bryce remains the only backup behind Nathan Rourke. So I thought I'd dig into the neg list a little bit and see who do they have the potential to bring up for training camp? Who could be an option for them? And there's a couple of them out there, but the one that is the most intriguing to me is Tommy Rittenhouse from Illinois State. This kid led the Redbirds to the national championship in the FCS as a major underdog. They had 4 losses in the regular season, but went undefeated in the playoffs up until the Natty and lost by a single point in overtime to the number 2 seed Montana State Bobcats. This guy is a grinder, a winner, a fighter, all the things that you want in a CFL quarterback. Fairly efficient, 65% completion percentage last year, over 3,500 yards, 40 touchdowns, 12 interceptions in 17 games, as well as 7 rushing touchdowns. He can scoot a little bit if he has to escape the pocket. He is the 4th player in Illinois State history to throw for over 3,000 yards in a season. 2 of those other guys played in the CFL. One, of course, as a cornerback in Trey Roberson, and then Kevin Glenn as well reached that mark with the Redbirds. This guy's not going to get a ton of NFL interest because he's listed at 5'11", 195. He doesn't necessarily have a cannon of an arm, but he fits that CFL mold of a quarterback, and I think he's got the chops that if he wanted to come up here and compete in training camp, he could potentially make the roster as a backup.
That's an intriguing random neg lister. And before we let you go, we just want to send our condolences to Barry Wilburn and his family. He tragically passed away in a house fire in Tennessee. And then also our thoughts and prayers are with the Tumbler Ridge School where the tragedy happened. Just awful news to hear. And again, thoughts and prayers from the 3DownNation crew go out to Tumbler Ridge and Barry Wilburn. That does it for this edition of the 3DownNation podcast. Make sure to subscribe, like, give us a 5-star rating on YouTube or wherever you listen to us on your podcast provider. And make sure to keep it tuned to the site. Just because free agency has died down doesn't mean we're slowing down, JC. We're going to have a depth chart series that's coming out, looking at the depth charts after the CFL free agent period has tapered off. And then, of course, getting people ready for the CFL Combine. You and Hodge will be in Edmonton in late March. So lots still going on and reasons to keep it locked to 3downnation.com.